Welcome to today's online session. Today I'm going to talk about one of the most important Canadian poets, whose name is Dorothy Livesay. I'm going to talk about her early childhood days, her working experiences, and her literary works, in fact, then, and finally I'll be talking about one of her important poems. Okay, so let me begin with her childhood experiences. Let me talk a little bit about her biographical description. Dorothy Livesay was born in Winnipeg, that is in Manitoba. Okay, and her mother, whose name was Florence Randall Livesay, was also a poet and a journalist. Okay, so obviously she is coming from a very good background. I would say literature background, where her mother herself was a journalist and a poet. Her father, on the other hand, whose name was JFP Livesay, was the general manager of a Canadian press. So I mean, her background, therefore, I think has given her a lot of confidence into developing into a kind of a poet. And obviously her mother and father both have helped her, to develop her, poetic, attitude and poetic writing skills and other things. So Livesay moved to Toronto, that was in Ontario, with a family in way back in 1920, and she is said to have graduated, from Trinity College. That was 1931, from the University of Toronto, and she also received a diploma from the University of Toronto's Faculty of Social Science, social work, in fact, in 1934. She also studied, at the University of British Columbia and the Sorbonne, those two places. And it was in 1931, in Paris, in fact, where Livesay became a committed communist. So she had a greater impact in her life, of communism, and which resulted into her becoming a member of a Communist Party of Canada. So she formally joined the Communist Party of Canada in 1933, and thereafter she became a very quite active member, in a number of, you can say, it's front organizations. To name a few, such as the Canadian Labour Defence League, the Canadian League Against War and Fascism. Then we had another organization which was named Friends of the Soviet Union, and the Workers' Unity League. So she became a very active member of all these front organizations, which were somehow associated with Communist Party of Canada. And Livesay also moved to Vancouver in 1935, and she was in fact married to a fellow socialist. She herself was a communist, but she was married to Duncan McNair, who happened to be a fellow socialist. She got married in 1937. In the early 40s, Livesay suggested to and married even Florence McLaren and Doris Ford, all these Canadian writers, that they start a poetry magazine. So she in fact came up with the whole idea of suggesting to start a poetry magazine, which would serve as a vehicle for poets outside somewhat closed Montreal circle. So she wanted to engage her activities into this poetic creation, and her suggestion was also taken up, and Alan Crowley agreed to edit a magazine, upon her suggestion. And the first issue of Contemporary Verse, appeared in September 1941. And after McCain died in 1959, Livesay worked for UNESCO in Paris, and then northern Rhodesia, which is now known as Zambia, as a field worker from 1960 to 1963. So she also underwent a little bit, difficult time, I would say, a difficult time, And from between 1951 to 1984, almost for more than 30 years, she was an instructor and a writer in residence at many Canadian universities. She worked for almost 30 years, 3 decades in many Canadian universities, to name a few, like University of British Columbia. There she worked from 1951 to 53, and then in between she left it, and then she came back again and joined it, from 1966 to 68. She also worked in the University of New Brunswick, from 1966 to 68, University of Alberta, University of Victoria, University of Manitoba, Simon Fraser University, University of Toronto. So she worked in these universities for quite a substantial number of periods, as I told you, for almost 33 years. She worked in these universities. And it was in 1975 that, Dorothy Livesay founded a journal, and that journal name was Contemporary Verse 2 Journal, Contemporary Verse 2. And she, left, and in British Columbia, and she passed away in 1996 in British Columbia. That was in Victoria, Victoria, British Columbia. So that's about her, her own life, I would say. Now let me briefly talk about her writing career, her publications, So when we talk about her publications, the first thing which comes to our mind is her first collection of poetry, which was entitled Green Picture. It was published in 1928. So what I would say is that her poetic career began from 1928 with the publication of this collection of poetry, which was entitled Green Picture, when she was only 19 years of age. And well, we have like Encyclopedia of Literature, writing about her, where it is written that these were well-crafted poems. It's written about her first collection of poems, or Green Picture, that it was well-crafted poems, and that not only showed skilled use of imagist technique. And let me tell you that this is the technique which she is employing in almost most of her poems. And today also we're going to talk about a poem where we will see how she is, adapting this, imagist technique. Perhaps you can say this is the technique which really prefigured even Margaret Atwood's condemnation of exploitative and fearful attitude to the Canadian landscape. And there was another book, in fact, this was the book, Green Picture, in fact, which really later disappointed, Livesay, because this book did not become very successful, I would say, So it was not very successful book, which dealt with, social classes, social issues. So people were not so much interested with this poem, so collection of poems. So this book, later really disappointed Livesay. She was not happy with this collection of books. However, when we talk about this first collection of books, which is entitled Green Picture, which was published in 1928, happens to be a precocious effort showing very considerable craft and developing social conscience among the people, So it talks about, considerable craft, and also social and consciousness which we need to develop into ourselves, And just in development to this, in 1932, she published Signpost, which really became very, very famous, okay, in which she demonstrated, I would say, technical skill. We see that in Signpost, technical skill is matched by growing a sense of her own persona. So she is engaging with a new kind of I would say technical skill, okay, which so far hitherto she had not talked about. So Signpost gave kind of a new kind of image about her. It presented her as a new poet, okay, dealing with a new kind of a technique, poetic technique. The 1930s saw Livesay working very, very actively for leftists. It has also been seen that Dorothy Livesay worked very actively for leftist causes, okay, as a social worker. So as I already told you that she joined Communist Party of Canada very formally. She became a member of Communist Party of Canada. And she started working very actively for leftist causes, okay, as a social worker, as an organizer, as a contributor to left-wing periodicals, and committed to the ideal of working class. Its contribution to the war effort. Livesay published Day and Night. This is book, and appropriately named Poem for People, because being a leftist, she wanted to dedicate her life, her works, her activism to the people, and this resulted into the publication of a book which was entitled Day and Night, and this was later named as Poems for People. Okay, so that shows, you can say, her cause for the people, okay, but particularly I would say the cause for the working class people. And it was also noticed that much of her literary effort of say the 1930s and 1940s, okay, is marked by stereotypical language of the leftist rhetoric. So it has been noticed that in the 1930s and 40s, her literary effort has been marked by the stereotypical language of the leftist rhetoric. And during that period, she published quite a number of books. And she published her first short story, which was entitled Heat, in the Canadian Mercury at the same age, okay, almost in 29, when she published her first collection of books, poems, in 1928. In the next year, she published her first short story also. Okay, her second book of poems, which is entitled Signpost, showed the increasing sophistication of her imagist skills. So remember that imagist skills is the technique which she is employing in writing her poems, and this is the technique which she has employed in writing the poem Green Rain. Okay, and we also observe an original sense of feminine sexuality being reflected, okay, in her writings, particularly poems, okay, and particularly in her second book of poems, which is entitled Signpost, which was published in 1932. Now, having talked about her literary publications, let me give a little bit information about her honors and awards. What kind of honors she was felicitated with. Let me begin with the fact that Dorothy Livesay won the Governor General's Award, which is considered to be the Canada's top poetry honor. And she won this Governor General's Award not once but twice. First was in 1944. She won this Governor General's Award for her publication. In 1944, she won her first Governor General's Award, okay, for her book, you can say, which was entitled Day and Night. And then again in 1947, she won the Governor General's Award for the second time, for Poems for People. Okay, as I told you, it was for the working class people. So for both books, she won the Governor General's Award twice. Okay, which is Canada's top poetry honor. Moreover, the Royal Society of Canada elected her as a fellow and awarded her its Pierce Medal in 1947. So 1947 happens to be a very fruitful year for her. Okay, when she won the Governor General's Award also, and she was also awarded her Lone Pierce Medal also. And in addition to this, Livesay also won the Queen's Canada Medal in 1977 and the Persons Case Award for the Status of Women in 1984. So being a Marxist, okay, feminist, she wrote for the causes of not only working class, people, men, but for women as well, okay, and that's the reason why she got this Persons Case Award for the Status of Women in 1984. In 1983, just a year before that, she was also made a doctor of, Athabasca University, formally, and in 1987, before, okay, she became an officer of the Order of Canada, okay, and later on, she was also awarded the Order of British Columbia in 1922, which was a very, very, famous, honor, I would say, which was awarded to less people, so she was lucky to be awarded the Order of British Columbia in 1922, and her poetry prize, the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize is a kind of a category. It has been established as a category of the BC Book Prizes that is awarded to almost the authors of the best work of poetry in a given year, particular year. So the best author is selected and the best author is given the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize, okay, and where these authors are British Columbia or maybe Yukon residents and have been for 3 of the last 5 years. So they're the ones from whom and this prize is given. One of them is selected and is given the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize. Originally known as the BC Prize for Poetry, 1989, it named after Livesay later on. Okay, so later on it was transformed. The name nomenclature was changed, for BC Prize for Poetry in 1989. When we look at her important major works, Livesay's major works, include collection of poems such as like Green Picture, which happens to be her first collection of poems. It was published in 1928. The second collection of poems was Signpost. Okay, then we have Day and Nights, which was published in 1944. Poems for People, and you have The Unquiet Bed, Plain Songs, Collected Poems, The Two Seasons, published in 1972. Then you have her other book, which was entitled The Beginnings, Winnipeg Childhood, that was published in 1973. The Raw Ages, Voice from Our Time, published in 1983. And then you have Journey with Myself. Okay, this is also one of her major works, which was published in 1991. So these are her major works. When we talk about her major works, she wrote quite a substantial number of books, and particularly poems, a collection of poems. And she is, bringing out various issues in her poem. Employing the technique of, I would say, Imagist style, Imagist technique. Okay, which is a very common technique. Okay, for her, which she is employing in almost all of her poems, Imagist technique, where she is making use of ironies, satires, metaphors, similes also, and which we find in this poem also, which we are going to discuss today. Now let me discuss one of her important poems, which is part of your syllabus, which is entitled The Green Rain. Okay, and this is part of the syllabus, as I told you, and this is the poem which happens to be a very memorable poem, and this is poem about memory, this is poem about remembering. Okay, we will see how she is employing, what kind of technique she is employing, and this is a poem where she's talking about memory, and memory is of rain, Memories also of like the poetry, speakers, and beloved one also she's talking about beloved, and she will be also talking about grandmother. There's also a memory of her grandmother. So both things. She also remembers the grandmother's shawl, her house, the parlor in the house. And the rain is remembered as the feathery fringe of her shawl. This is the line which has been used by her. She is using this, the feathery fringe of her shawl, particularly in the last line of the poem. So the green rain is particularly based on, I would say, memory, remembering, remembrance, okay? And where we will see how she is trying to incorporate two things, outside in and in outside. So this is a kind of an, I would say, juxtaposition, okay, which she is trying to, this kind of juxtaposition, which she is trying to bring into this poetry, particularly in this poem, which is entitled The Green Rain. So let me begin by reading this, how it reads. It reads like this. I remember long veils of green rain. So look at the metaphors she is using. Long veils of green rain. She is comparing this one. Feathered like the shawl of my grandmother. So here, as I told you, the feathered like. It's feathered like the shawl of my grandfather. So the veils of green rain. So it's raining, maybe it's okay. It's pouring, it's downpouring, and she is using the word veils for the green rain, and she's saying it is looking as if it's looking like feather, okay, feathered like the shawl of my grandmother, as if my grandmother's shawl has been spread there, okay, outside, okay, with the nature, and the rain is also looking at that. And green from the half green of the spring trees waving in the valley. So this is looking completely green from the half green of the spring trees waving in the valley. This is how she's doing. Now this is the poem, which has been in fact divided into 3 verse paragraphs. So we'll see. So the first verse paragraph, we have already seen how she starts and she compares veils of the rain with the shawl of her grandmother. Okay, so the first one talks of veils of green rain. Okay, so she is using this metaphor, and there is an analogy which has been employed by her, and so analogy is established between those veils of the rain and the shawl of the speaker's mother. So there is an analogy. She is bringing two analogies: the veils of the rain, and she is comparing that with a shawl of the speaker's, the poet's mother, grandmother. And how is rain looking? The rain is green from the half green of the spring trees. So she is looking at the spring trees, and she just realizes, she has this kind of feeling that rain is looking very green, as if it's raining green, okay, and waving in the valley. So all this is happening on the basis of memory, her memory, I would say. Okay, the speaker is remembering these things. So remembering or remembrance happens to be one of the important, I would say, elements and components of this poetry. Okay, where she's talking about grandmother. Okay, let me read ahead and see how it goes. Then it goes, I remember the road. This is the second verse paragraph. Okay, I remember the road like the one which leads to my grandmother's house. So she is remembering the road, in fact, okay, like the one which leads to my grandmother's house. So in the first verse paragraph, what you see that she is talking about the nature, and from nature now she has come to household. Now she's going to talk about her grandmother's house. So I remember the road like the one which leads to my grandmother's house, a warm house with green carpets, okay, geraniums, a trailing canary, and shining horsehair chairs. So chairs are made of horsehair, and the silence, full of the rains falling, was like my grandmother's parlor. So look at the visualization she is using. She is visualizing the nature, rain. There is raining, and then again she is comparing this rain with her grandmother's house. Okay, so full of the rains falling was like my grandmother's parlor, as if it was a parlor. It was looking like veils. Okay, like shawl of her grandmother, and alive with herself and her voice rising and falling, rain and wind intermingled. So, I mean, the rain has been compared with her voice also. Her voice was rising and falling, and so was the rain. So, at times, the rain would, I mean, uh, pour in very heavily, at times, and at times it would stop. So, that has been compared with her voice. So, in this first paragraph, what we notice is that the poet is talking of the road, okay, which she remembers. Okay, she remembers that road which was leading towards her grandmother's house, and this is like the road that really leads to her grandmother's house. And then we see how from first verse paragraph where she was talking about the nature, she was talking about the rain, and in the second verse paragraph she's talking about the house of her grandmother. It is a warm house, it is a green carpet, okay, filled with green carpets. And there is geraniums, she's describing, a singing canary, shining chairs, okay. There is silence, she's talking about silence. There is silence, and what fills the silence is the rains falling. So rains falling is filling the silence. Though there is silence, but she can really, really grasp that feeling of the rain. Okay, and her grandmother's parlor was alive with herself and her rising and falling voice. Rain and wind intermingled there and on that road. So rain and wind. So somehow both got intermingled. Okay, intermingled with each other there on that road. So from the first verse paragraph, we see that she is talking about nature, rain, shawl of her grandmother. And the second verse paragraph, she's talking about her grandmother's house, particularly inward, looking house where she's talking about even chair. She's talking about okay, how it was looking like. It was looking like a parlor, and then she's comparing rain, okay, with the voice, and rain and wind, how it got intermingled with each other. So what we witness here is that the poem is split obviously into three verse paragraphs, okay? And each paragraph is begins with the words I remember. I remember, if you remember, for both, and the first and the last line of the entire poem also begin in this way, which is possibly giving us a kind of really meaning that she is recalling memories continuously, fluidly from one to the other. And what we notice, unusual about her poem is that there is no meter, there is no rhyme, just a poem written free from any kind of a form. It's a free verse. It's written in free verse, I would say. And the main part of the poem really shows, Livesay's images style. That's very important for all of you to understand here, because that's the kind of a style she is employing in this poetry. Images style, based on imagination. Story based on imagination. Okay, now let me talk about the last paragraph of the poem, okay, which reads like this. I remember. Again, this first paragraph, the third one also, is beginning with I remember. I remember on that day I was thinking only of my love. Now see, from talking about her reign in the first verse paragraph, in the second paragraph about her grandmother's house, now in the third paragraph she's talking about her love. Okay, she's saying I was thinking only of my love and of my love's house. So in the second paragraph she's talking about her grandmother's house. In the third paragraph she's talking about her love. She says, no, I was thinking only of my love and of my love's house. But now I remember the day as I remember my grandmother. So as she was remembering her love, now she is also reminded by her grandmother. She remembers her. And she remembers in the last line, we'll see how her grandmother also left, this. I remember the rain as the feathery fringe of a shawl. So I told you in the beginning how the rain has been compared with the feathery fringe of a shawl. So rain has been compared. In the first paragraph also, we have seen that rain has been compared to veils, veils and with her shawl. So in this last paragraph, the speaker is bringing, in her love and her grandmother's house both together, and she says that she remembers that on that day she was thinking only of her love and his house, but now she remembers the day as she remembers her grandmother. So what is the conclusion which we draw out of this, that she remembers the rain as the feathery is very soft, feathery fringe of her shawl, grandmother's shawl. So the rain has been compared with very soft piece of her grandmother's house. So today let me sum up what I have done today. I have talked about Livesay, and in the last few lines we talked about, the poem itself, the Green Rain, which happens to be a very spectacular poem. We have seen how each sentence itself adds the entire picture of which is being presented there, and one of the interesting things which you find about her poetry is that Livesay strings images from the outdoors to inside. In the first paragraph, she is talking about rain, the nature outside, and then in the second paragraph, she talks about her grandmother's house. So she is, sort of, binding, one image to the other, and together. So she strings, images from the outdoors to inside, from nature to man-made. So this poem is a very strong image, this depiction of strong image, I would say, and that is shown throughout the poem. But we also we see this strong image through recalling the colored rainfall and the memories of her grandmother, previous loved one, are intertwined within you. So all they are intertwined with each other, which you find within them. So I hope that today's online session has helped you in understanding Dorothy Livesay's works, early childhood days, about her literary career, her achievements, her honors, and most importantly, since we discussed today her poem Green Rain, so through her poem you have understood her style, her way of writing, and particularly her poetic accomplishment. You have known about her poetic accomplishment. So that's it for today. I suggest that please go through the booklets so that it becomes easier for you to understand this Dorothy Livesay. Thank you.